Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Chris Boomsma, CEO here at the Council for Agricultural Science and Technology, and I'm pleased to join today's webinar here at the beginning, very briefly, before we hand it over to the Diverse Corn Belt team. Today's webinar is entitled Diversifying the Corn Belt, Policy Pathways for a Resilient Agricultural Future. A little bit before that, though, first I want to talk about CAST. Our science here at CAST shapes agriculture. Since 1972, we've been providing credible, unbiased, science-based information about food and agriculture to policymakers, media, the private sector, and the public. Next slide, please. About us. First of all, we're a US-based organization, but internationally connected. We're a 501c3 membership-supported nonprofit, and we uniquely span animal, food, and plant in the science domain of agriculture. We are nonpartisan, and all of our information, including today's webinar and the paper associated with it, are free to all. Next slide. This is our mission and our vision. Again, we convene and coordinate networks of experts to assemble, interpret, and communicate credible, unbiased information. Those experts are very, very important to our mission. You're going to hear from some great experts today through this project. Next slide, please. We do rely on a good host of volunteers. We have a variety of boards, and we have a number of active task forces. And you can see the makeup of our volunteers. A lot of folks come from academia because they help write the papers and review them, but we also have folks from government, companies, and nonprofits. Next slide, please. A little bit about our future. You may have noticed through our LinkedIn account and through our communications and marketing efforts, we are charting a pathway now to become the National Academy of Agriculture for the United States. Why now? Well, agriculture faces rapid technological change. A lot of geopolitical competition is occurring, shifting consumer expectations and evolving food and national security risks. We feel that there is a need for a strong, coordinated cross-sector leadership organization in agricultural science and technology, and we're exploring if CAST is the home for that. Next slide, please. So what are we doing now? Well, we are working to bring together the Strategic Advisory Council, which is already underway and working. And they are defining what it means for CAST to serve in this role, identify capabilities and partnerships, like working with folks from the Diverse Corn Belt, defining structure and governance, and defining CAST's role in the future science landscape. So that's the future of CAST. I hope you will join us on this journey. Next slide, please. If you would like to learn more about CAST and how you could get involved and look for opportunities in membership in particular, please take a look at that QR code on your screen and scan it with your phone or other device at this time. Get involved through education products, newsletters, social media. We can showcase your organization, what you're doing there. Networking, student programs are available, and other forms of support. Next slide, please. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me directly. You can see my office phone number there and my cell. You can also click on the QR code with my LinkedIn profile and explore CAST more thoroughly through the larger QR code on your screen at this time. With that, that's the end for my introductory comments. I'm now going to hand it over to the Diverse Corn Belt team, and in particular, hand it over to the lead, Linda Prokopi. Linda, welcome to today's webinar, and take it away.
Thanks so much, Chris. Welcome, everyone. It is my pleasure today to talk to you about our large project called the Diverse Corn Belt Project. We are a USDA NIFA-funded effort. We've been working together for over 4 years, and today you're going to hear some of our big picture findings about how we can better prepare the Midwestern Corn Belt for diversification. So to start, let's talk a little bit about why diversification. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in 2025, as I'm sure all of you know, the vast majority of crop production in the Corn Belt was planted to corn and soybeans. And while we will and we should always grow corn and soybeans in the Midwest, we wanted to look at the possibility of growing more to help farmers, to help communities, to help the land be more sustainable and resilient. Because as we know, commodity production has become risky. There are a lot of challenges for farmers, really showing a lack of resilience, persistent failure, and diminishing returns of an ag system that's based on the monoculture of corn and soybeans. Next. So evidence suggests, prior to the work that we all started doing in the Diverse Corn Belt Project, that ag diversification can do a number of things, both for the farms, for the land, for communities, for larger groups of people, to help increase farm resilience, to support local food systems, reduce the negative ecological impacts of monoculture crop production. But we grow corn and soybeans for many reasons, one of which is that it's the easiest thing or the most simple thing to do under a normal circumstance. And there are a lot of challenges to diversifying the landscape. So what we wanted to do in our Diverse Corn Belt project is do some systematic analysis and assessment of different pathways towards diversification at farm, landscape, and market levels. Next. So here's a picture of our team. As you can see, this is a very large, diverse team. We have lots of different universities involved. We have a number of nonprofits and government agencies also involved in this team that has been working together, like I said, for over 4 years around the premise, next, that diversification is needed at the farm level, the market level, and the landscape level. And again, that we want these visions and frameworks to help us inform shifts to a more diversified agriculture. The focus of our project has been Illinois and Indiana and Iowa, just to sort of help it be a little bit more of a confined geographic focus. But I think the findings that you'll hear today will resonate beyond just Illinois, Indiana, and Iowa. Next slide, please. At the farm level, we're thinking about 5 different types of agricultural diversification. So in addition to continuing to grow corn and soybeans, we've also been looking at extended rotations, perennial pasture or forage and perennial and bioenergy crops, agroforestry, horticultural food crops, and grazing livestock. Next slide. Over the last 4 years, we've done a number of different things, including in-field work and modeling. We've developed education and extension programming, but we've also done a great deal of social science research. We've done a lot of listening to farmers and other agricultural stakeholders in these 3 states. So we started back in 2022 doing focus groups, and we talked to 100 farmers across those focus groups. We surveyed farmers and heard back from 725 of them about their thoughts about diversification. We interviewed 35 farmers who had already transitioned to a diversified system about barriers and opportunities. And we have done something we called RAD teams, which stands for Reimagining Agricultural Diversity. These are teams of people, total of 178 who participated over time, who we met with in each of the 3 states multiple times, culminating with a cross-state meeting very recently. And you're going to hear the results of that meeting today in this meeting. Next slide, please. So collectively, across our focus groups, our interviews and surveys, we heard a number of barriers expressed by farmers and others in the agricultural landscape to a transitioning to a more diversified system. So lack of markets to sell products, the high cost, low availability of land, low short-term returns on investment, extra time needed, lack of labor, different policies, crop insurance being mentioned a lot, and the scalability of diversification. Today you'll hear more about the lack of markets and policies, as those really kept coming up again and again as things that people wanted to talk about and provide suggestions for how to improve. We also heard a number of opportunities in these different methods where we listened to people. So you can see all of those opportunities here. And the first one, developing processing infrastructure and capacity, is one again that came up a lot that folks wanted to talk about a lot more, that you'll hear more about in the results that we're about to share with you. All of these other barriers and opportunities you can read about in other papers that we've published and other work that we're doing, but we're focusing today into these policy recommendations that came out of these efforts. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to one of our co-leads of our paper that you're going to hear about today, Dr. Lauren Asprooth.
Great. Thank you so much, Linda. So I get to share today a little bit more detail about our Reimagining Agricultural Diversity team meetings. I've been really grateful to get to be a part of this research over the last couple of years, and I'm super excited to talk today about what we did and what we produced. So the purpose of our RAD team meetings was to elicit a broad range of ideas about the barriers to diversification and potential strategies to overcome them. So these overarching questions are kind of similar to the questions we asked in farmer focus group surveys and interviews that Linda just talked about. But these RAD teams were a little different. They were with a broader range of stakeholders in agriculture with a specific intention to develop clear strategies by the end of the meeting. Next slide. We had a really great team of researchers that worked to develop and facilitate these teams across several universities and nonprofits. And I really want to acknowledge them because it was really an amazing team. We also worked with a great group of policy experts to help refine and finalize our policy opportunities. And in our final meeting, and I'm going to show some pictures throughout these slides from our RAD team meetings that I think highlight what was happening there. So this photo here on the right is Linda, Dr. Prokopi, and another researcher, Dr. Erin Thompson, organizing one of our RAD team activities with Post-it notes from a card storm activity. And this is where participants were given Post-it notes and asked to write what they would like to see in a future landscape in their region and place the notes on a wall. And as those notes were going up on the wall, participants and facilitators started to organize them into similar categories. Next slide. So a little bit on the who, what, when, and where of our RAD teams. So for the who, we were really looking for sort of creative thinkers, problem solvers, folks that were open to thinking about diversification from across the agricultural spectrum. So farmers, NGOs, suppliers, buyers, crop insurance agents, local government, educators, extension. And we identified these folks through our partner organizations and our research team. In terms of the what, we had facilitated activities to discuss challenges and pathways to enable a more diverse corn belts. And we spent a lot of time as a research team creating these interactive facilitated activities for each meeting to capture participants' perspectives and ideas. And you can see a lot of these from the photos. The when and where, we held one team per state, and we met 2 times a year. And as Linda mentioned, we had one final meeting that was combined across the I-states. So in total, we had 3 years of meetings, 10 meetings total with 178 participants. And a lot of those participants came back for multiple meetings. This photo on the left, I wanted to highlight because this was one of our most well-received activities during our RAD team meetings. One of the members of our research team, Ishraq Awashra, generated these really neat landscape images through AI of our 5 different diversified production systems. And then participants were asked to place stickers on the photos indicating about where on the landscape they thought things would work well in their region and what needed to be modified. Next slide. So here's a little more detail on the types of participants we had in our RAD team meetings. You can see we had a lot of farmers and landowners. That was the biggest group. We also had ag advisors, educators, researchers, rural residents, retailers, extension, government agency staff, policymakers, and investors and bankers. I'll note that participants could identify with multiple categories, which is why the numbers here add up to more than 178. And in terms of those types of farmers who attended, it was pretty varied. We had conventional folks growing corn and soybeans, maybe with some hogs or cattle, to row crop farmers growing 3rd and 4th crops like small grains, to smaller scale, really diversified veggie growers. Next slide. So our specific research questions we were hoping to answer from this work was, according to agricultural stakeholders in the Corn Belts, what are the visions for a more diversified agricultural landscape? And what is needed to inform regional and national pathways to diversification? And this photo here on the right, we used a World Cafe style activity where participants moved from table to table, each with specific questions about diversification, and asked to share their perspectives and given paper and markers to note or draw their ideas. The question at this table in the photo that Dr. Jay Arbuckle, one of our facilitators, is asking is, what does agricultural diversification look like in your region? Other questions included, does diversification make sense in this region? Are there places in the region where diversification might make more or less sense? And finally, what kind of information or support would be needed for diversified operations to succeed? Next slide. In terms of our timeline, meetings 1 and 2 were really more of a baseline visioning session. So we were looking at vision for diversified agriculture and challenges and opportunities for diversification. Most of the activities in these photos are of those first 2 meetings where we're really sort of getting broad information from folks. Meetings 3 and 4 were more about action planning. So we really heard from folks during our first and second meeting that they wanted to move forward from talking about challenges and getting into more practical and applied solutions. So in meeting 3, we spent time narrowing in on policy challenges and opportunities. And in meeting 4, again, this combined meeting across the 3 states to discuss and refine those policy pathways and opportunities. The photo here on the left was from our first set of meetings where we conducted an activity called Q-Sort, which is where we crowdsource statements on priorities for the future of agriculture in rural communities from our focus groups and interviews that Linda mentioned. And we had participants use these colored red and green dots to indicate their highest and lowest priorities. So that the idea was to identify where there was the most common ground as well as areas of disagreement. Next slide. So I want to highlight a little bit more about our process, as this was a pretty unique multi-phase participatory research process that we used to identify policy opportunities that were really emerging from those who are most affected and those with the most on-the-ground knowledge. So as a research team, we worked to analyze the data from each set of meetings, synthesize it, and bring it back to the next round. So over here on the left on the slide, you can see meetings 1 and 2. Again, those were identifying top challenges and opportunities. What came out of that, again, participants identified policy and markets as the most important opportunities for supporting diversification. So in meeting 3, we had participants get into smaller groups around 7 topics related to policy and markets that we had narrowed down from the data gleaned from the meetings 1 and 2 to discuss particular policy opportunities within each. Then after meeting 3, as a team of researchers, we narrowed that list down from 7 policy pathways to 4. And in the final meeting, meeting 4, participants chose a pathway and joined smaller groups to narrow down the specific opportunities within each. And in that meeting, we had our policy experts in each of those smaller groups to help facilitate those conversations as well. Next slide. So the culmination of this work is the brief that we're excited to bring you all today. We've been working with CAST to publish and distribute this that's focused on the opportunities emerging from our RAD team process, and it's called Diversifying the Corn Belt, Policy Pathways for a Resilient Agricultural Future. Next slide. So the top opportunities identified at the end of this process were Opportunity 1, crop insurance, Opportunity 2, conservation incentives, Opportunity 3, post-harvest market infrastructure, and finally, Opportunity 4, institutional purchasing. So the first 2 opportunities are primarily focused on Farm Bill programs, so crop insurance, Title 11, conservation programs, Title 2, and then those last 2 focus more past the farm gate on markets and infrastructure. I want to note that conservation incentives were discussed really pretty frequently during our RAD team meetings, given the synergies between conservation and diversification, and the fact that conservation tends to be a gateway to on-farm diversification. So while it's not directly related to diversification, there's a lot of overlap there. Next slide. So my colleague Brennan and I are going to go through with you all each of these opportunities and talk about the challenges that we heard from our RAD team participants, as well as what we heard during focus group surveys and interviews, and as well as other literature. And then we'll discuss the specific opportunities within each pathway. So the first one, Opportunity 1, crop insurance. Crop insurance may not cover individual diversified products. This is a key problem for ensuring less common crops. The way crop insurance works is that those sort of canned individual policies tend to be available only for those crops that are most commonly grown in the county. It's a county by county system. So for example, if a farmer in Iowa wanted to grow oats, in many counties, there's no standard policy available, and the farmer would need to work with an agronomist and a crop insurance provider to get a written agreement, and they have to have at least 3 years of production history for that crop. So this is time consuming and can be difficult if this is a new crop for the producer. Next up, whole farm revenue protection policies can be challenging for farmers and insurance agents to access and utilize. Whole farm revenue protection program was a program that came out of the 2014 Farm Bill, and it was really designed to ensure smaller to mid-scale diversified operations based on the revenue of the operation as a whole, as opposed to by individual crop. Unfortunately, it's been widely noted that the paperwork is really challenging and insurance providers don't have the training or incentive to sell those policies. And this is noted by the fact that under 20 policies were sold in 2024 in each of the I states. Next up, so NRCS conservation compliance is poorly enforced. The Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS, requires that all land insured through federal crop insurance has a conservation plan. So essentially, taxpayers provide funds to producers each year to subsidize crop insurance, which we do at about 60%, and in exchange, participating producers are required to take certain steps to implement a conservation plan to conserve soil and wetlands. However, conservation compliance is generally not well enforced, and the system reviewing compliance is inadequate. Next one. Subsidized crop insurance premiums can enable unsustainable practices and systems. So this is sort of this larger problem that by subsidizing the premiums farmers pay for their crop insurance with taxpayer subsidies, farmers don't have the same incentives to use practices that naturally reduce risk through production diversity. They can produce more simplified rotations, including on marginal lands that may otherwise just not be profitable. Overall, without crop insurance subsidies, their return on investment might be substantially lower some years, making production riskier, and longer rotations with more crops more economically rational. Next slide. So now I'll talk through the list of opportunities that we created during our RAD teams, and especially in that final meeting, to address some of these challenges. The first one, increase enforcement of conservation compliance for highly erodible lands. Next one, make diversification enhancing whole farm revenue protection policies easier to sell. Next, establish state level discounts to federal crop insurance for using diversified systems. So this one's sort of similar to those COVID era crop insurance discounts for using cover crops, except for this would offer producers a discount on their premiums specifically for using diversified practices. Next, D, adapt federal crop insurance policies to cover more diversified products, make those products easier to insure. E, tie federally subsidized crop insurance premiums to ecosystem benefits of diversified rotations. So essentially, for a grower to receive that taxpayer subsidized premium, they must be using practices with ecosystem benefits, which can include diversified practices such as a third crop in rotation. Finally, F, reduce or remove federal crop insurance subsidies. So something similar to what was done in countries like New Zealand, removing those subsidies altogether or lowering the subsidy from where it currently stands at about 60%, and encouraging farmers to use other risk reduction mechanisms like diversification of systems and markets. Next slide. So moving on to conservation incentives and some of the challenges there. First up, working lands programs like the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, EQIP, and Conservation Stewardship Program, CSP, are designed primarily to pay farmers to meet conservation-specific goals, and those goals don't always align with production diversity. So we really heard from folks during our RAD team meetings that they wanted to be able to do more with those enrolled acres, including using more diversified practices and being able to economically benefit from those acres. Next up, the Conservation Reserve Program, CRP, prevents the harvest of crops or grazing of animals on acres enrolled in the program, unless in the case of emergency, limiting economic benefits of using diversified practices on those acres. And as a result, many farmers bring acres enrolled under CRP back into production once their contract ends. Next one, organizations like NRCS, Farm Service Agency, FSA, and other organizations that provide conservation technical assistance lack the resources and knowledge to support diversified systems. And finally, Title II conservation program use tends to lack social diversity, including from beginning small scale and historically underserved farmers who we know are more likely to use diversified systems. Next slide. So moving along to those opportunities. First one is add resources and awareness within Title II programs to support beginning, small scale, and disadvantaged farmers. Next, pilot a diversified rotation initiative within EQIP that prioritizes diversified rotations and extends contract periods. So unlike CRP, EQIP is used to pay for conservation and technical assistance on working cropland. So to encourage those multi-year crop rotations and incorporate, say, small grains, legumes, perennial forages, we can pilot multi-year, so say 3 to 5 year EQIP contracts and provide payments for their establishment and maintenance. Next, adapt CRP to encourage harvestable and perennial crop systems. So opening CRP contracts to specific harvestable plantings as well as perennial crops, agroforestry, and forage that still achieve those target environmental services could incentivize diversity. So for example, provisions in CRP allowing haying and grazing for non-emergency use. Next up, D, strengthen local capacity and resource control of Title II programs. This ultimately can increase staff investment in staffing, training, and funding for local technical assistance, and that can help support overall farmer participation in Farm Bill conservation programs. Finally, tie incentive payments for Title II programs to practice bundles with technical support and business development requirements. So essentially with this one, we're saying that bundling conservation programs for a suite of diversification practices, say like extended rotations, grazing livestock, along with technical services and business training to support that transition tends to have better outcomes than individual payments, say for seed, single practices, or equipment, and can be better suited to addressing these multifaceted barriers to diversification. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Brennan, who will talk us through the market-related opportunities and challenges.
Great. Thank you, Lauren. So I'm going to discuss the market-related challenges and policy opportunities, starting with Opportunity 3, post-harvest market infrastructure. So the first challenge that we have is that local markets, especially processing, are limited for diversified products. And this challenge is particularly crucial to overcome for enabling diversification, as many farmers are not willing to adopt a diverse crop or product if there's not a market to sell it to. The second challenge is that regulatory rules governing markets are challenging for local and or small scale processors to meet. And this is often due to limited financial capital among such organizations. Likewise, regulatory rules such as food safety regulations tend to be written and geared towards larger organizations with more capital to meet these regulations. Finally, market infrastructure development programs, which are often structured as cost share programs, are constrained by unstable funding, and the required matching funds can limit small scale market entities or individuals from participating in these programs. So more local market development will require expanding access to these opportunities. Moving into the opportunities for post-harvest market infrastructure, our first is A, establish or enhance tax credits for local processing and infrastructure, particularly for small and mid-scale processing entities. B is establish or enhance government programs that support local market infrastructure for diversified products. Enhancing these existing programs, particularly to support local market infrastructure development, may require adapting some of these program structures to better accommodate local and or small scale market entities. Our next opportunity is C, support shared infrastructure for local production of diversified crops. And this opportunity is particularly important for helping local farmers and entities overcome cost barriers to developing shared infrastructure. And according to results from our various social science methods, farmers are particularly interested in shared infrastructure. And then finally, D, adapt regulatory rules to decrease barriers for local and or small scale processors. Changes to these regulations that are geared towards accommodating small and or local market entities could help these entities persist on the landscape. So moving into our final opportunity, Opportunity 4, institutional procurement. Our first challenge around this is that organizations that might purchase food to support their functions, like schools or hospitals, lack the resources and organizational structure to purchase and handle diverse local food products. So, for example, schools that lack kitchen infrastructure and skilled workers might not be able to prepare fresh food products properly for consumption. And this barrier is particularly relevant to our next barrier, which is local food products sold through direct markets, like these institutional ones, are often more expensive than products sold through conventional supply chains. So organizations lacking financial capital would very likely face barriers to purchasing local food products because of these expenses. And finally, institutional procurement programs are limited in the resources they can provide, especially in light of major programs like the USDA Local Food Purchase Assistance Program being defunded in the past year. So moving into policy opportunities for institutional procurement, our first one is A, increase direct public investment to support institutional purchasing of diverse local food products. B, invest in research on the benefits of institutional procurement of diverse local food products. And investing in research on this particular endeavor can support the bettering of existing programs as well as the creation of new ones, and just better inform how these programs should work on the landscape. And finally, C, develop and disseminate frameworks to guide institutional purchasing strategies and actions. So existing frameworks like the Good Food Purchasing Framework help guide institutional procurement based on very specific goals or values, such as enhancing local economic development, supporting fair agriculture, or enhancing environmental benefits of local food production. And having these sorts of strategies, goals, values, and actions central to institutional procurement can further support a resilient Corn Belt food system. So with these policy opportunities, the research team and policy experts further ranked them against each other based on their perceived feasibility to adopt and implement, or the degree of ease to establish or adapt a policy, as well as their perceived transformative potential or the degree of change enabling diversification from each opportunity. For this ranking, our team of researchers and policy experts ranked each opportunity based on sets of feasibility and transformative potential criteria. So for feasibility, the criteria were the opportunity's administrative complexity to implement, political support for the opportunity, its economic cost, technical readiness, and stakeholder acceptance of the opportunity. For transformative potential, the criteria were the opportunity's impact on core challenges, its scale of change, its long-term sustainability, innovation level, and its co-benefits. So with this criteria, we created cumulative feasibility and transformative potential scores, with scores of 0 indicating low feasibility or low transformative potential, and scores of 20 indicating high feasibility and high transformative potential. And so we graphed these opportunities, and here is the graph of the policy opportunities placed according to these rankings, with transformative potential on the x-axis and feasibility on the y-axis. Purple dots indicate crop insurance opportunities, blue are conservation incentives, red are post-harvest market infrastructure, and orange are institutional procurement. And you'll notice there are little letters in each dot, and that indicates the specific opportunity. We could spend a lot of time looking at this graph, but I wanted to point out a few opportunities that have high feasibility and or transformative potential. So the first opportunity I wanted to point out here is Conservation Incentive B, pilot a diversified rotation initiative within EQIP with extended contract periods. This opportunity is ranked the most feasible of all of the opportunities that we have here. It also happens to be the opportunity that is the most feasible and transformative. The next most feasible opportunity on here is institutional procurement B, which is invest in research on institutional procurement benefits. And then in terms of highly transformative opportunities, crop insurance E here, tie federally subsidized crop insurance premiums to ecosystem benefits of diversified rotations is seen as the most transformative, with crop insurance F, reduce or remove federal crop insurance subsidies is also being seen as transformative. So you can spend a bit more time with this figure and reading about the ranking process in our paper. But for now, I'm going to move into conclusive remarks and key takeaways from this research. So first off, the opportunities that we shared here vary quite a bit in the degree of change required for their fruition and support among federal and state decision makers and agricultural stakeholders. As such, this range of opportunities could be feasible across varying political climates. We further found that there is broad interest in research and decision-making around diversification in the Corn Belt. Specifically, we found from our focus groups and interviews that farmers see and understand the benefits of diversification and are interested in it. Our RAD team meetings also confirmed that there was a lot of interest in diversification among a broad range of stakeholders. It is, however, also important to note that there are other persistent constraints to diversification beyond policies and markets. For example, we know that many farmers face financial constraints, labor limitations, and rising input costs. These topics were outside the scope of this policy and markets research, but we will need future efforts focused on changing these persistent constraints. Finally, we crucially understand that there is a need for a coordinated and united strategy to promote diversification. The work that we presented today contributes to this strategy by identifying key policy opportunities to enable diversification from the stakeholders most affected by resilience challenges in agriculture and the broader food system. So on that note, I would like to wrap this presentation up and say thank you to our co-authors, our researchers, and policy experts, as well as our RAD team participants and cast. And I'd like to thank those who are here for this webinar. Thank you for attending. And at this point, we will take any questions that you all have.
Thanks, Brennan. Thanks, Lauren. That was fantastic. We have a number of excellent questions coming in, and Emily's going to put them to the screen. Here we go. Okay, so the first one from Olivia Shoemaker, really like the potential scores. I love this question. How might implementation look across the 4 different categories? Or in other words, what do you hope to see happen next in realizing these identified opportunities?
Well, that's an excellent question. And that in terms of what we're hoping to see next, I think I can tackle this part a little bit. We are hoping to send some folks to DC with the Agree Coalition to talk with some legislators about these policy opportunities. And in terms of implementation, Lauren, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really sure exactly what that question is asking. Maybe how might implementation look across the 4 different categories? I think in terms of implementing these opportunities generally, like Brennan said, I think we're working with folks on the ground that can help carry these forward. As researchers, we're not doing so much of the advocacy, and we're really looking to make sure that the organizations that we work with can carry this work forward and make sure that it has the impact that we want it to.
So sounds like this would be a better question to our farmers and our other stakeholders in the RAD team meetings. What should happen next? So if folks have thoughts on that, feel free to type those into the chat as part of this conversation. All right, let's go to another question from Brooke McWhirter. Crop insurance could definitely support adding crops into systems, but likely wouldn't fully transform the dominant cropping choices. I would think it would be incremental. Could you expand on its inclusion as a transformative process?
Yeah, thanks, Brooke. That's an interesting point. I think it's debatable how transformative it would be. I actually spent quite a bit of time looking into the research on this, and I think, in the economics research, it doesn't show that it would have a huge impact in terms of just adding potentially different crops or reducing subsidies. I think it would look really different if we're going to reduce the subsidy on our premiums versus getting rid of the subsidy altogether. And I think one thing I think a lot about is that it would be really interesting to do more of a deeper dive into how it worked in New Zealand and the impact that it had. In terms of expanding on its inclusion as a transformative process, like Brennan mentioned, that was a process where we brought together all of the RAD team researchers and facilitators, and our policy experts, and they ranked those. So that was it was ranked as transformative by our team.
Anything to add there, Brennan, or should we go to the next question? All right, next question. From Cassidy. Do you see NRCS's regenerative pilot program as a potential facilitation mechanism for diversification, especially if they staff up their technical service providers? Or does it feel like maybe focusing on state and local efforts is a better bet as USDA's budget continues to be diminished?
I'm happy to take this one, Brennan, if you want. I anticipated this question, so I looked at the regenerative ag pilot because I had been meaning to do that, and I certainly think there's a lot of overlap. I mean, the pilot's focused on sort of bundling practices using whole farm strategy, which is very much in line with diversification. I think the difference is sort of on its focus on production diversity, so trying new crops in lieu of a cash crop, which is riskier for farmers. And needs more support and incentives to do so. But that pilot certainly includes practices like conservation crop rotation and grazing livestock. I just also want to note, like, the pilot talks a lot about American grown whole foods, but most of those practices listed, besides those two I just mentioned, are more focused on conservation as opposed to actually production. So I think there's more room for the pilot to include more focus on diversification. I also appreciate the note about whether or not it could be better at the state or local, especially given everything that's happening to USDA. I think there's always an argument that state rather than federal incentives for any sort of programming can be more feasible at the state level and tends to be more nimble and adaptable to those needs of local farmers. But yeah, I don't think I have the final answer there.
Thanks, Lauren. Okay, from Carolyn. Is there a role for our large national and multinational consumer packaged good companies in the procurement opportunity?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. When it comes to procurement and such with these organizations like schools and hospitals, I'm sure some of these companies could help play roles to better facilitate this procurement between these institutions. Companies could certainly play roles in being more of the in-between buyers, between farmers and these institutions to help facilitate procurement. That's not necessarily direct from farmers to institutions. And I believe that would be a particularly helpful way in places where, these institutions might lack resources. Having another organization that does have the resources to help them achieve these sorts of local purchases would be beneficial for institutional procurement.
Thanks, Brennan. All right, from Jeff, how might strategies be developed to influence policymakers at various levels? Community, county, state, national, and global.
That's a big question.
It is.
I feel like that's a question for. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I can try to comment a little bit on this. I think something that's really important when we're considering strategies of how to influence policymakers is to consider what policymakers really care about when it comes to agriculture, when it comes to the economy and such. So I think some of the feasibility criteria actually that we've included in our work highlight some things that policymakers care about, such as economic cost. Are the stakeholders interested in these policy opportunities and whatnot? And this is just talking about county, state, national levels. In terms of global levels, now that gets a bit more into trade agreements and whatnot. And I think today, while we're dealing with some tariff wars and some, I guess, not great trade agreement conditions at the time, I think there are opportunities to talk about how different policymakers from across different countries can work together to support diversification of their own countries and possibly change trade agreements to accommodate more local or national diversification of agriculture. But in terms of influences, actually, never mind. I'm going to stop myself now and pass this off to anyone else here who would like to respond.
That was great, Brennan. Yep, perfect. Okay, from Tyler B. Where does farmland consolidation come into this discussion? Industrial monoculture is simplified as a function of the scale of production per farmer or landowner. Introducing complexity demands more labor, reduction of parcel size, more intensive management. Labor and localized supply chains are intertwined with consolidation and industrial production. Have we had any conversations about land deconsolidation?
So I think I can comment a little bit on this, but I know Lauren can comment as well. So I'll start off and pass the baton over to Lauren. So we've heard a bit about farmland consolidation in our RAD team meetings and how this is an issue that can constrain diversification quite a bit. We know that farmers are really interested in talking about the consolidation issue since it affects them quite a bit as well. That being said, we didn't get too much into these consolidation discussions with our policy work. However, that is a really big future research effort that just needs to happen to support diversification efforts. And let me pass this over to Lauren because I know she could comment a bit more on some of our other social science methods.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say that I think this is really important to bring up, that we are not talking about some of these larger structural issues like consolidation, and make a quick plug for some work that Brennan is leading that is going to be really focusing more on that from our RAD team meetings. So they're taking the transcripts and more diving into those larger issues. It did come up in RAD team meetings, and I just want to make one quick note that in that activity that I showed in one of the slides, it was called Q-sort, where we sort of got everybody's perspectives on certain statements. We had a statement from one of our focus groups, particularly on consolidation, and it was one of the two most agreed upon statements was farmers were against consolidation. So it's very much so that the farmers, at least that we spoke with, as well as the ag stakeholders, did not want consolidation within their communities. And I guess I'll also just note, I think that absentee landowners and larger landowners who aren't embedded in the communities where they farm are also going to be less likely to use systems that have ecological benefits and local economic benefits to rural communities. So I think with that, I can move it over to the next question.
From Stephanie, did you explore how to best convey these diversification messages to non-operator landlords? So following on to your last answer there, Lauren.
No, I think that would be something really important. We didn't really talk about messaging so much to other folks. We were mostly just getting folks' perspectives that were in the meetings. But I think that there's a lot more research and work that needs to be done that's really transdisciplinary, working with academics, NGOs, and producers, and a range of stakeholders to really understand how we can tailor messages to different groups, including absentee landlords. So I think that's a really good point, and hopefully will be addressed more in the future.
Another follow-up from our good friend Dennis Toddy. Hi, Dennis. For Stephanie's question, were there non-operator landowners in the RAD teams?
Yes, there were. Yeah. I have to go back to that graph, but we had farmers and non-operating landowners as some of the biggest groups.
From Donald, currently too much of our corn and soybean production is used for animal feed and biomass fuels and not for local human food supply. What are your major recommendations to counter these issues for the Farm Bill, if you agree that they are issues?
Well, I can chime in quickly and then I can pass it over to Brennan. And Linda, please feel free to chime in on these as well. So I think that in terms of, I can speak specifically to crop insurance here. Crop insurance is primarily supporting a small range of commodities, and particularly in the Corn Belt, those commodities are corn and soybeans, where the vast majority are going to animal feed and ethanol. So I think that our recommendations around shifting crop insurance to support different kinds of production practices, as well as different kinds of crops, especially crops that can be grown for food, which is our focus within DCB. So crops like small grains can be really beneficial and start to produce the supply that's needed to be able to get markets, buyers interested in those supply chains going. Brennan and Linda, feel free to jump in there.
Anything to add, Brennan?
I don't have anything to add.
Okay. I'm gonna decline to answer and stick with my moderator role. Great questions though. So, all right, from Cassidy, institutional procurement, as we discussed, is a good step, but is there discussion of creating broader consumer demand? Locally produced products from smaller producers tend to be more expensive, and so consumers need to have their values aligned with the product to want to purchase it.
Yeah, this is a really great question. And I would also argue that this is indeed a big problem that was not necessarily solved in RAD team meetings because it is quite a persisting one. It is quite the economic challenge. However, we did discuss a bit more about in RAD team meetings about consumers, their roles in creating demand for local food products. And yes, we heard quite a bit about how these local food products are very expensive. Rural communities where these products are produced aren't necessarily going to be able to afford those kind of products. And while we didn't go into every single policy opportunity that we heard from every single person at the RAD team meeting, we certainly heard folks discuss things like, maybe there's something that can be done related to SNAP or other kinds of programs that help people purchase food that can help with this consumer demand. There's other markets research that exists within Diverse Corn Belt that also engages a bit more with value added kind of products like oat-based things, oat milk. Yeah, I don't have too much more to comment on that, but Lauren, Linda, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can just say, I think it goes back. Well, first off, we didn't really talk a lot about consumer demand. I think that's important, but sort of a whole nother ballgame. I also think it sort of goes back to making healthy local food affordable. So Brennan mentioned SNAP, other incentives. I think shifting what we're subsidizing, which is currently primarily corn and soybeans and other commodity crops that aren't going to supply food to people directly. And I think creating more consumer demand for something like, niche products like artisan grains can be helpful and can help farmers, put those crops in the ground with more confidence. But I also push back a little bit when I hear more about the consumers need to really drive this shift. I think overall people are busy and they have a lot going on, especially now, and it's going to be hard to really get everybody to care about where their food comes from and to really be willing to spend extra money on local healthy products. And I think that's okay. I think we just need broader structures and institutions that make local healthy food affordable and accessible. And I think that's something that's a priority for this administration with MAHA. And I think that we need more to be done on it on a larger structural level.
Those are great answers. I would just add that early in the RAD teams, this did come up as something people wanted to follow through on, but when it was actually, let's sit down and talk about how to do it, it was very challenging. And I think that's why it didn't really rise to the level of the policy and market opportunities that you two discuss in the report. So thank you. Great questions. Next question from Bonnie. Is there a connection to be made between low corn prices, the huge industry and political effort that goes into finding new markets for corn and soybean, and then saying, rather than finding new markets, we could grow something else on these acres?
Sorry, I need to reread this question for myself.
I guess, yeah, I think there's certainly a connection. And I think that right now, especially given the fact that, row crop farmers in the Midwest and probably, in other places, but specifically in the Midwest, where growing corn and soybeans are really, I think, at a crossroads. They need a different alternative than the crops that they're growing. So I think they are interested in different markets. And it's not just, let's find a different way to make corn and soybeans work. I think they're interested in looking at, crops like small grains, which are kind of at the low-hanging fruit within those kinds of production systems. They need the markets there first to be able to sell those crops and to be confident in putting those in, and not just the markets, but also the infrastructure and supply chains within them. Brennan, do you have anything else there?
I don't think I have too much to add. I think that was a great answer. Thanks.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, Bonnie, for the question. From Gustavo, from your perspective and studies, what do you think is the profile of farmers who would be more prone to adopt farm diversification? First part. Second part, do you think extension programs focusing on diversification should be tailored to specific profiles first in order to increase adoption?
Well, I think in terms of the profile farmers who are more prone to do anything differently is someone that's a little bit less risk averse and more willing to experiment. So we definitely know that across a lot of the work that's been done, including work by Linda and others. A lot of the folks that I talked to, I held a lot of the interviews with specifically diversified farmers. And I spent a lot of time, we're going to hopefully publish soon this work that sort of documents what was driving them to diversify. And it goes across a range of factors. It's not just extrinsic, incentives like economics and price. They also want healthier farms. They want to conserve their soils. They want to produce a product for their local community. A lot of those that are grazing livestock, they care about animal welfare. Some of them are using, skills that they learned from their parents. They inherited that conservation ethic, and their parents were using diversified practices. So I think it's kind of across the board. Do you think extension programs focusing on diversification would be tailored to specific profiles? Yes, definitely. And I think that's what we're hoping that this upcoming work will help. And just a plug for the social sciences in this adoption field, because I think we have a lot of work out there that shows sort of in typologies or in other ways how these profiles for different farmers change, and how based on what they're interested in, what motivates them, and how those can be tailored to extension and outreach programming.
Thanks, Lauren. I know I said I was going to moderate and not say anything, but one thing I noticed early on in our focus groups with diversified farmers is most of the farmers who have diversified, that we talk to at least, own their own land. And I think that ties into a lot of the other questions that have come up in the chat here today in terms of sort of structural issues and consolidation and access to land and all types of things that are beyond the scope of some of the work that we talked about today, but I do think are critically important things to think about. All right, are we doing one more question, Emily? Or am I wrapping up? I'm going to go with wrapping up since I don't see another question, and I think we're at the hour. Thank you, Brennan and Lauren. Thank you, Cass, for this opportunity to partner with you in disseminating these results that really are straight from the mouth of our farmers and our agricultural stakeholders. So I hope you all have time to read the report and spend some time with that, and feel free to contact any of us if you have any further questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.